Oh, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bo-Gyun Shim, head of the United Nations Project Office on Governance, a part of Division for Public Institutions and Digital Government of UNDESA. As you have seen through the video, I welcome you to the side event of the 59th session of the Commission for Social Development, where we will discuss innovating public governance and leveraging digital technologies for social inclusion of vulnerable groups. We have a very rich agenda and a group of high-level and excellent speakers. Although we cannot meet physically in person, we would like to make sure that this is an engaging and a lively event. Participants will have the opportunity to ask questions through the Q&A function in Zoom and also on the Facebook comments box. This side event will be recorded and later be uploaded on UN Web TV and the UNPO website after the event. I would like to mention that as of today, we have over 440 registered participants from around 90 countries that are connected. With this, I am now delighted to open the side event. I have the great honor and pleasure to introduce Ms. Maria Francesca Spataro-Lisano. She is the Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs of UNDESA, who will deliver the opening remarks. Assistant Secretary General, Mrs. Spataro-Lisano, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Your Excellency, Ambassador Cho, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to welcome you to the side event on innovating public governance and leveraging digital technologies for social inclusion of vulnerable groups during this 59th session of the Commission for Social Development. I would like to express my gratitude to the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Korea to the UN for jointly organizing this important event, as well as to the Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation for the great support. We are at a moment when promoting inclusion of vulnerable groups and ensuring leaving no one behind is more urgent than ever. The poorest and the most vulnerable groups are hardest hit by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has reversed decades of progress in reducing poverty and inequality. As the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has highlighted, pursuing sustainable and inclusive recovery from COVID-19 and addressing the rising inequalities are among his priorities for 2021. Due to the far-reaching impact of COVID-19, the challenges confronting vulnerable groups are becoming more complex, multifaceted, and severe. They have to contend with job loss, income reduction, and lack of access to essential public services such as healthcare and education. So governments must step up their efforts and deliver effective responses, moving away from business as usual and be imaginative and innovative in ensuring inclusive services to the vulnerable groups. It calls for new ideas, concepts, innovative approaches in policy design and in service delivery. It also requires a transformation in institutional mechanisms for collaboration and participation, more responsive organizational structures and processes, as well as innovative strategies and practices. Against this backdrop, this side event today addresses how to innovate public governance and leverage digital technologies for promoting government innovation for social inclusion of vulnerable groups. Allow me to share a few points to help stimulate the interactive discussion which will follow. First, it is essential to engage vulnerable groups and promote their participation in policy design. in the implementation and in the monitoring and review processes. Our experience has shown this is an effective pathway to identify and address the special needs of vulnerable groups. Through their effective engagement and empowerment, vulnerable groups can be the agents of change and development. At the same time, innovating public governance also requires engaging different stakeholders. Multi-stakeholder partnership can help governments marshal human, financial, and technical resources, tapping into the ideas and strategies and solutions of the whole society. Secondly, leveraging digital technologies can contribute to promoting social inclusion of vulnerable groups by enabling accessible and inclusive public service delivery to all, leaving no one behind. Digital technologies and disaggregated data can support accurate and effective identification of vulnerable groups and their special vulnerabilities. So advancing digital economy can create job opportunities, can facilitate economic participation, and foster inclusive access to finance for marginalized population. Digital technologies can also provide platforms to facilitate engagement and participation of vulnerable groups, and in turn enhance public trust by avoiding misinformation. During the COVID-19, internet access has become a lifeline, but not for everyone. Many vulnerable groups lack access to the internet and ICT devices. And they also lack digital skills and literacy to harness the potential of digital technology. So government must work with the whole of society to address the digital divide and promote digital inclusion through effective partnerships. Thirdly, to foster government innovation for social inclusion of vulnerable groups, it is necessary to develop the capacities, skills, and a new mindset of government officials at all levels and at societal level. It requires a paradigm shift towards transformational leadership and inclusive mindsets in governance. Not easy, but necessary. DESA worked at what we believe is a useful tool to support this shift. Today, we will introduce the training toolkit on government innovation for social inclusion of vulnerable groups, which is part of UNDESA's curriculum on governance for the SDGs. This toolkit aims to provide a useful tool for public servants who need to acquire innovative strategies and approaches to promoting social inclusion of vulnerable groups. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that this event can serve as a meaningful opportunity to share these innovative approaches, strategies, and experiences among countries. I wish you a fruitful discussion and a very successful event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary General, for the insightful remarks. You eloquently highlighted the challenges and the opportunities for paradigm shift in governance for inclusive and empowered vulnerable groups. Let me thank you again for being with us to open the side event. We really appreciate it. Now it is with great honor to introduce His Excellency Ambassador Jo Hyun. He is the permanent representative of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations, who will deliver opening remarks. Ambassador Jo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Shim. Dear participants, I want to welcome each and every one of you to this event. And let me also thank Ms. Spatellizano for your opening remark, and also Mr. Shim for organizing this event. Over the past year of COVID-19 pandemic, we have witnessed a multitude of inequalities being exposed and their rapid magnification. The pandemic hit every corner of the globe, yet the widening disparities have been felt more often by the most vulnerable groups and in the most vulnerable countries where people lack sufficient infrastructure and technologies. Some say that it would be difficult to achieve the SDGs as a result of COVID-19, its devastating impact on vulnerable people. This may be true. However, I also believe that this pandemic opens up a unique opportunity to double down our efforts to achieve the SDGs. This is because we now realize how important it is to focus our policies and investment on the poorest and most vulnerable. And we will work together for a more inclusive and resilient pandemic recovery. In this regard, it is urgent to innovate public governance and leverage digital technologies to make more inclusive, participatory, and effective public services for all, particularly for vulnerable and marginalized people. Therefore, today's meeting is taking place at an opportune time and resonates with the theme of this year's Commission for Social Development as well. My government recently launched the Korea New Deal as a national strategy for a post-pandemic economy to help build my country more innovative, inclusive, and greener. This centers around three key pillars: Digital New Deal, Green New Deal, and finally, stronger social safety nets. With the Digital New Deal, Korea hopes to accelerate its economic transformation into a more resilient one in the area of the fourth industrial revolution. We also aim to provide customized government services for different needs anywhere at any time. The public infrastructure enhanced by data, networks, and artificial intelligence will ensure a stable provision of essential services and mitigate the impact posed by external shocks for all, especially for the vulnerable and marginalized. Meanwhile, the Green New Deal aims to achieve net zero emissions and accelerate the transition towards low carbon and decentralized energy. It will lead us to a sustainable and eco-friendly national economy and help implement the Paris Agreement. In the course of our large-scale transition to a digital and green economy, we will focus on building stronger employment and social safety net. We will achieve it, therefore, by providing universal employment insurance, supporting job training and re-employment, and enhancing the accessibility to digital infrastructure for vulnerable people. In this regard, I'm confident that the Korean New Deal will contribute to building back better from the pandemic. I know, however, that we will have setbacks, sometimes unintended consequences. Nevertheless, throughout the whole process, Korea will share its experience with the international community, because we know that we have to share our information sometimes compare our notes with the international community. If we really want to achieve a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive post-pandemic world that leaves no one behind. Once again, I would like to thank you all for making today's event meaningful. I look forward to listening to the panel discussion, and I also look forward to our continued collaboration with the UNDESA and other key stakeholders. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Ambassador Joe for his encouraging, insightful remarks. You shared how the Korean New Deal will contribute to building back better from the pandemic, and how it will make a path for more equitable and inclusive society. We deeply appreciate the Republic of Korea's partnership with the United Nations. I would like to once again thank both high-level speakers of the opening session for their insightful remarks. This concludes the opening portion of this side event. We'll begin the panel discussion now. It is with great pleasure to introduce my colleague and the moderator of this session, Ms. Mi-kyung Park. She's the Governance and Public Administration Officer of the United Nations Project Office on Governance. Mi-kyung, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shim. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mi-kyung Park, and I'm the moderator for the panel discussion today. As highlighted by ASG Ms. Patolizano and His Excellency Ambassador Cho, social inclusion of vulnerable groups is the key to SDG implementation and leaving no one behind. Now let's start the panel discussion to discuss different strategies, approaches, and country experiences of innovating public governance and leveraging digital technologies for promoting social inclusion of vulnerable groups. Today, we have 6 distinguished panelists who will share insightful ideas and experiences, my colleagues as discussant to summarize the discussion with policy recommendations. Then we'll have a Q&A session. So we would like to invite all distinguished participants to share your questions to the speakers in the Q&A box. Then let's begin the panel discussion. First, Ms. Adriana Alberti, Chief of the Program Management and Capacity Development Unit of DPIDG UNDESA, and I will co-present on the capacities, skills, and new mindsets that are required for fostering innovation for social inclusion. And we'll also introduce UNDESA DPIDG's curriculum on governance for the SDGs and the training toolkit on government innovation for social inclusion of vulnerable groups. Ms. Alberti, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mi-kyung, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. In our presentation today, we will address 4 key questions around the issue of governance capacities for social inclusion. 1, why are new capacities needed to strengthen public institutions to leave no one behind? 2, what capacities are needed for effective governance? Number 3, how can the training toolkit on government innovation for social inclusion support the development of those capacities in governance institutions? Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development requires governments to have in place not only effective and accountable institutions, but also inclusive institutions, as outlined in Goal 16. Furthermore, as we already heard, the current COVID-19 pandemic calls for a deep reflection of how societies are governed, what type of society we wish to live in, and what government capacities therefore would be needed to build back better and ensure more equitable societies. Next. However, the reality on the ground is challenging in many parts of the world. So let's take the case of a struggling family and this little girl. The situation is that her mother has contracted COVID-19. Her father is unemployed, 8 children. There's a lack of access to the internet in the household. Therefore, there's no schooling. Brother has a disability, huge debts. Therefore, children are at risk. And many times, what is the answer or the response from public administration institutions? Well, there could be a lack of empathy, low transparency, many agencies which are involved, but they don't talk to each other. So they're working in silos. Top-down solutions, in other words, the family themselves, they're not being consulted in what their real needs are. And all of this leads to conflicting interventions, which in the end bear high costs and actually low impact for the struggling family. Next. But this is, as we all know, this is not an isolated case. And in fact, from the Statistics Division, the UN Sustainable Development Goals Reports 2020 has highlighted that COVID-19 has caused the first increase in global poverty in decades, and 71 million people are now pushed into extreme poverty. And as we already heard, it's the most vulnerable groups that are being hit the hardest by the pandemic. So we know that to confront this situation, we need new national and local capacities to promote the social inclusion of vulnerable groups and to design and implement holistic, integrated and inclusive policies and institutional frameworks that can support the aspirations and principles of the 2030 Agenda, including leaving no one behind. In particular, government officials, public servants would need people-centered inclusive mindsets. We already heard about the importance of an innovative mindset. Capacities for leadership and commitment for inclusion are essential, as well as flexibility and adaptability. That is, an experimental mindset is needed. And of course, accountability and transparency, particularly of how funds are being devolved towards people in need, design thinking and integrative approach, and in terms of skills, empathy and communication skills, and of course, digital skills for innovative services and for collaboration. Next, please. But building back better and implementing the SDGs requires governance capacities across a number of key areas which are interrelated. And these are the areas that UNDESA DPIDG selected for the curriculum on governance for the SDGs, which was developed together with eminent experts, as well as schools of public administration from around the world. And the curriculum is composed of training of trainers toolkits that can be used for face-to-face workshops and also virtual workshops. And as I said, the training toolkits are interlinked and they form a holistic framework for capacity development on governance. The topics include changing mindsets and public institutions. This is a critical issue. Transparency, accountability, and ethics, institutional arrangements for policy coherence. They also include a toolkit on effective national to local public governance, government innovation for social inclusion of vulnerable groups. And today you're going to be hearing more about this toolkit, risk-informed governance, innovation and digital government, e-government for women's empowerment. Next, please. So the purpose of the curriculum is really to promote a critical understanding among public servants of what the sustainable development key issues are, and to enhance their capacity so that they can become agents of change, and of course also to develop their knowledge and their capacity to design, implement, and carry through action plans that can be very helpful then in promoting transformation at the national and the local level. Next, please. The curriculum will be hosted on the United Nations Public Administration Network. It is coordinated by UNDESA DPIDG, and this is a network of global, regional, and national institutions that are working on Goal 16, and in particular in the area of public administration, public institutions. So I would like to invite all of you to visit the UN, the UNPAN page. So all of the toolkits will be available there. But now it is my great pleasure and honor to invite Ms. Park, our moderator, who will provide more details about the training toolkit on government innovation for social inclusion. You have the floor, Ms. Park.
Thank you very much, Ms. Adriana Alberti. Now, I would like to introduce the Toolkit on Government Innovation for Social Inclusion of Vulnerable Groups. Social inclusion of vulnerable groups is essential for fulfilling the SDGs and ensuring leaving no one behind. As vulnerable groups have special needs with unique vulnerabilities, such as which are multifaceted and dynamic, government needs to innovate the way they deliver public services to the vulnerable groups and engage them in the policymaking process, particularly by leveraging digital technologies. In this background, this toolkit is developed with the objective of improving the capacity of public servants, as well as other relevant stakeholders, to foster innovation for promoting social inclusion. Through this toolkit, the learners will be able to understand the special vulnerabilities and challenges of vulnerable groups and learn different innovative strategies, approaches, and experiences of government innovation for social inclusion. This toolkit also aims to foster inclusive mindsets in the public sector and in the whole society that vulnerable groups can be the agents of change through empowerment and engagement. Next slide, please. This is the overall structure of the toolkit, which is composed of a total of 15 modules under 5 thematic clusters. The first thematic cluster with 4 modules is defining vulnerability and examining policy and legislative frameworks and innovation needs. The second cluster is on addressing the root causes of vulnerability by particularly focusing on identifying vulnerable groups and promoting inclusive and participatory governance. The third cluster is on innovating public services with a focus on the role of digital government and frontier technologies, and also building an enabling ecosystem for empowerment of vulnerable groups. This part also includes a module on inclusion of vulnerable groups during public health emergencies, such as the current COVID-19 pandemic. The fourth cluster is on developing the capacity of public sector, examining institutional, organizational, and technical capacities, as well as leadership and mindsets that are required for innovation and inclusion. The last part will cover the implementation of the innovation with a focus on financing and partnerships, as well as monitoring and evaluation. Next, please. So the toolkit is developed for a 5-day training program, and this is a draft training agenda. Each module is composed of thematic presentation, diverse group activities, as well as reading list. And toolkit also includes pre-questionnaire for self-assessment before the training and the action planning activity to develop actions for a change. The training program can be customized based on the specific training demands of countries and organizations. Next slide, please. And this toolkit is now available at the UNPAN website. Please kindly refer to the link provided here to access and download the toolkit. And UNDESA DPIDG can provide support on toolkit implementation. First, this toolkit will be converted to an online training course, and it will be available for all users. We can also provide support with customized trainings upon request of member states and organize facilitated online trainings. For example, we organized a 2-day online training workshop last November together with MDEC and UNCDF to pilot test this toolkit. For those member states that are interested in implementing this toolkit and requesting our support, please send the request to us at unpan@un.org for further discussion on possible collaboration. We have a plan this year to implement the toolkit in collaboration with selected government agencies and partners in response to the request of member states. As this toolkit is a living document, we would also appreciate your valuable comments for its continuous updating and sustainable impact. So we very much look forward to working closely with all of you in this important area of social inclusion and leaving no one behind. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Louis Millman, Vice Chair of the UN Committee of Experts on Public Administration. Mr. Millman, could you explain the main elements and features of inclusive governance that could promote social inclusion of vulnerable groups What do you think are the innovative approaches and strategies towards such inclusive and participatory governance? Mr. Mielman, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very pleased to be able to speak for 7 minutes here. And usually I like to have 45 slides at least with me. But this time, Mi Kyung Park, you asked me to only deliver 3 slides. So I have only 3 slides. And it will be about why, what, and how. That is more or less an answer to the questions you asked, I think. So I will go for these 3 topics. Next slide, please. So the why question is, what is the problem we're talking about? And I think a really deep problem is that the most common public governance style is still hierarchy. It is centralist thinking. It's about always legal solutions and no other solutions for problems. It's a top-down style of thinking. Its silo mentality belongs to that. And above all, it is not a style that is characterized by inclusiveness, by empathy. It's not, I don't dislike hierarchy, and the hierarchical style is important to bring structure and so on. But it doesn't have the empathy you need to include vulnerable groups. So that's a big problem. And then what should we do? Well, as somebody who worked in the public sector for almost 40 years, I think we can do something ourselves as public officers and as people related to that, working with that. The most needed innovation is, I think, is shifting the balance between the institutions and the tools and the mindsets of hierarchical and network, more empathy type, and market governance styles. It's not about a paradigm shift. That's not the right idea, I think. It's not about a paradigm shift. It's building a new balance. A bit less hierarchy maybe, and a little bit more and much more from the network style, which is about participation and partnerships and collaboration. That's one. The second part of the what answer is that innovating public governance should become a strategy policy area with its mission to make administrations ready to implement all the SDGs. And that's important. We should ask ourselves whether the Department for Public Administration in our countries is really a key player in the SDGs implementation. It should be, but it is rarely. So it's but they should be in the center of the coordination of the SDGs, because they are responsible for a big part of SDGs 16 and 17, the enabling SDGs. Next slide, please. I have 2 slides on the how question. For me, it's always the central question. Policy is what you do, but governance is how we do it, with what tools and so on and so on. So 2 recommendations. The first is I recommend to use the 11 principles of effective governance for sustainable development, which were developed by UNDESA with the Committee of Experts on Public Administration, and then endorsed by the ECOSOC Council, by the countries themselves. And this list of 11 principles is therefore so important because it's very different, for example, from a list of principles of good governance from OECD or the World Bank, because this has 5 of the 11 principles are about inclusiveness. And that's key. That's very central. So implementing these principles and using them is a very good thing to do. The African Union, the African peer review mechanism under the African Union is doing a study now to the application of these principles in several African countries, and that's very interesting. The second thing is creating the capacities and mindsets for inclusive and participatory governance. And there is in the training Mi Kyung Park mentioned, there are many examples, good examples on this. And of course, digitalization is one of the key issues. But also the last one I highlighted, changing the mindset and behavior of civil servants. Can we have the next slide, please? And talking about mindsets, I think working in silos is the main cause of ineffective governance for social inclusion of vulnerable groups. And there are 3 types of silos. You have the political silos, where ministers may not work together very well or don't like each other. There's institutional silos, the working in different departments that have no relationships with each other. And then very important, the mental silos between our ears. And silos are not only bad, they're also good. They give structure, they help responsibility, transparency, accountability, and also they give identity. So the rule should not be breaking down all the silos, but what I call teaching silos to dance, make them work together, more flexible, more permeable, and without losing the necessary structure and the accountability. For this, you need trust-building methods, such as the mutual gains approach to negotiation. You need to organize cross-cutting teams and try out matrix organization types, for example. You need informal meetings with people across different departments. You can organize that. And last but not least, you need adaptation to the culture and tradition in the country. We are here today with 90 countries, more or less, 90 different cultures. There is no one size fits all. So, and a Cuban salsa is different than a Polish polka in the dancing metaphor. Last slide, please. So already to wrap up, I talked about why, what, and how. And on the why, I said hierarchical thinking is not compatible with social inclusion of vulnerable groups. We have to do something about that, but don't destroy it. Second, on the what side, innovation is about getting a better balance between different governance styles, a bit less of hierarchy in most countries, I think. And for the SDGs, we need mission-oriented public administration reform. And the third, the how issue, use the principles of effective governance for sustainable development and work on changing mindsets, and more specifically, get rid of the silo mentality in public administration organizations, but keep silos for structure and accountability. And as very last comment, all this was said about public governance, but very much also applies to the governance of private sector organizations or civil society organizations. So we have a common task to do, and we could also work on this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Millman, for your very insightful response, introducing the principles of effective governance for sustainable development and emphasizing particularly the importance of participation, partnership, and collaboration, as well as the mindset and behavior for social inclusion. Thank you very much. Next, it is my great honor and pleasure to invite His Excellency, Mr. Sam Hong Burrows, Secretary of State of the Ministry of Social Affairs, Veterans and Youth Rehabilitation of Cambodia. Your Excellency, based on your country experiences, could you tell us what are the key strategies for promoting integrated social protection for vulnerable groups and ensuring leaving no one behind at all levels? Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Park, and thank you, thank you, everyone. Hello from Cambodia. First of all, I'd like to just give a brief outlook of what Cambodia is. And to respond to that, I definitely agree with Louise and Adrina and Ms. Alberti earlier that I think what Louise was mentioning here is about teaching silo to dance, where was the weakness of our government in the past. So if you actually look into what we are, where Cambodia is currently right now, we are a country with 15.5 million population. 68% of Cambodia are under 35. So 2 out of 3 people are under 40. So this is how we look. Cambodia looks very young country. Economic growth about 7%. We are actually leaving about 9% of our population under poverty at the moment. So in order to tackle this poverty, we actually created a Social Protection Council to handle issue where we can start to tackle problem for our vulnerable group. So this is where it become interesting. Where next slide, please. I forgot it there. Yeah. So this is how it looks within our system: social protection, economic finance, and this is how the program that we are running through. So I will only highlight one program only in here, where we actually look into the whole thing. But just to look into the second star there, protection for pregnant women and children. About a year ago, we started this program for the whole nation to test out. But what happened when the pandemic happened, we were able to expand this program into a bigger project. Next slide, please. So my main focus will be on this slide. This is how it looks. So what happened, Cambodia has gone through since 2011, we're working with the GIZ partnership. We actually were going to identify the most vulnerable group within our country. So I mentioned earlier about 9% of poverty, population under poverty line at the moment. So by looking at this 9%, we were going around the country, 1/3 of the country, one-third of the country every year, to actually have this detailed data within hand. But before that, 2016 or 17, we never not yet able to digitalize this data. Fast forward into 2019, the moment that we start to actually realize that we have to upgrade our system, we actually start to implement this cash money for pregnant women and children. We actually start to lay out, distribute our tablet into commune. At the time, that was not yet believed that our commune are able to handle this modernized tablet that are able to enter data and centralized database, all integrated and everything. But we're able to try to push it and train them. Fast forward in 2020, the moment that COVID-19 started to hit within the world, our government started to think rather, what can we do to support the lowest quantile of our population? Looking at the data that we collected over the last 10 years, we looked into it. There were about 2 million people that actually look about 9% of our population. We said, okay, this group actually could be the target that we have to target first. Make sure that they have enough food, enough money to support their family, the daily basis, their daily needs. So from there, we're able to tailor-made cutting costs from all the ministry. Every ministry is supposed to cut down their budget within 50%, save it up to start channeling those budget into supporting our lowest quintile and other intervention. From there, we were able to, I worked with our partner here, the DP within Cambodia, and we started to come up with a plan. What was the poverty line? Who was the vulnerable group? The elderly, disabled, head count, family base. So we started restructuring poverty line and actually coming up with a contribution where we can actually support poor 1, poor 2 level within a different amount of head. Everyone get a head count cash. Every family would get a certain amount, and every vulnerable group, disabled, elderly, pregnant women, everyone will get a different amount of contribution from our government. From there, we went further. Can we actually allow more people to come in? So by doing that, we actually was working and actually distribute more tablet all across the country within the health center, within all the community, to actually working on it. From there, we actually allow people to coming in, register, and actually able to have a questionnaire go to their household to actually allow them to be questioned and identified as poor or not poor. So by doing this, referring to, I think Ms. Adriana was mentioning something like 71 million all around the world that actually come into poverty line. So from here, I think Cambodia within 2020, because since our census came out just like almost the same time, we almost double our poverty line at the moment, which means that we actually included more people coming to our program. Right, we started about 400,000 families. Right now we are looking at about 700,000 families. Per person, we start about 2 million. Now we're looking at about 3 million. So this is how the growth is. And we're actually looking to expand this now within the next few months and make sure we are looking ahead also, rather what is looking like, plan ahead and to see what is the whole 2020 budget look, 2021 the system. So next slide, please. So this is what we are looking at doing right now. So at the same time, by next slide, please. By working on digital innovation, what we are working now with our development partner, we're actually looking at to expand our social registry, expand developing our team to actually able to implement multi-dimension poverty. We actually looking to actually create a family package and go ahead on this. So there are so much more things that we actually working on right now. And I think Cambodia right now, we are still a challenging country. I think we have only about, the whole country, we have about 50% of population that are able to access internet, but at the same time, we have a very big amount of mobile user. So this is something that we can use. And within all these transfer that we are doing, while we actually transferring this, we're actually using mobile banking to actually give this cash out. So there were just a lot of things that are actually still in play right now at the moment. So I think this is how much I can share. But again, I just want to refer back to Luis and Adriana with 7 minutes. I think there's a lot of questions that can be given back. But at the same time, I think this is what we learn here is we were weaker when we work as an institution. But the moment that we start to create this social protection council and we start to shine lights on this, our vulnerable group, we start to actually bring in more people to start believe that we can come together, start to building more program that can actually raise them, lift them out of poverty. So as we do this, now as we start doing this more and more, evidence start to show that things really change and people's life really actually grow into better. So I think this is thank you, and thank you for giving me the platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your very insightful remarks, sharing the experience of Cambodia in fostering an integrated social protection framework through interministerial cooperation, and also sharing how the government is working together with the local communities and harnessing the data for identifying the poor and vulnerable groups and promoting social empowerment. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Sumitra Nail, Vice President and Head of Digital Skills and Jobs of Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation. Dr. Nail, could you introduce Malaysia's initiatives in leveraging digital and frontier technologies for engagement and empowerment of vulnerable groups, especially in digital economy? What do you think would be also innovative approaches and strategies for addressing the issue of the digital divide while fully harnessing the potentials of digital technologies? Dr. Nail, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Park. Very good morning, Your Excellency, and fellow panelists, as well as the audience that have joined us today. Allow me to share a case study from our country as to how we are leveraging digital technology to address vulnerable groups. Yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So today I'll be sharing about this particular initiative, where basically we've used the power of the market and the power of the network enabled by digital technology to address vulnerable groups and to promote greater socio-economic inclusion. And what we've done is basically to leverage on the sharing economy, which is an online these are online platforms which enable the sharing of assets and resources. And so by doing that, it enables direct community participation to share their skills or to share assets that they have with others in order to monetize these shared resources. And so what this does is it helps to promote greater equitable distribution of wealth consistent with the goals 8 and 10 of the SDGs. And so as the Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation is charged with leading the digital economy, this is an area we find can really help to do two things. One is to catalyze new growth for traditional sectors, but more importantly, it can help to address socioeconomic issues faced by the bottom 40% economically in the country. And so what the government's role in this entire network or ecosystem is basically to help create a trusted crowd, right, in terms of supply of talents and skills, as well as to address trust issues relating to the demand, that is the jobs that are being put out. So what we do is we profile people from this bottom 40 communities. We train them on how do you actually access jobs that are on these platforms. At the same time, we go out and we mobilize demand. So we actually encourage companies to put out jobs on such platforms. These are task-based, bite-sized, gig-type jobs. And our other role is also to work across agencies to encourage the government to keep an open policy, around embracing this new sharing economy model. Obviously, it can be quite threatening and disruptive to traditional models where incumbents are, for example, if you're in the logistics industry or transportation, taxi companies, hotels, they would be threatened. And so this requires a very forward-thinking approach as to how you embrace sharing economy. Next slide, please. And so the problem that we've been trying to address with these initiatives is basically the low levels of disposable income amongst the bottom 40% of the population. And in terms of household income, what we are looking at are those that earn less than $1,100 a month. And they typically have a net disposable income of only about 20% of that. And so it's very, very low income communities, blue-collar workers, those who are unskilled, retirees, people with disabilities, single mothers, so on and so forth. And so the idea is, how do we empower them to be part of this gig or shared economy? And so we do this via two programs, e-Rezeki, and the second one is called GLOW, which is Global Online Workforce. e-Rezeki basically stands in Bahasa Malaysia. The English version is to generate income, online, or benefits online. And so on the right, you see these are all the companies that are part of the sharing economy platform that actually put out jobs that Malaysian workers can bid for and participate in. And over the last 5 years that we've been doing this, we've grown this ecosystem from 5 local companies in Malaysia offering such services to now 106 local companies. In addition, we also partner with global companies. There are more than 30 international platforms that offer jobs to such low-income communities in Malaysia. Next slide, please. And so we've been tracking the performance, or rather the impact of the work that has been done. And to date, more than 400,000 people over the last 5 years have been registered and profiled from B40, bottom 40 communities. We've trained more than 360,000. And out of that, about 30% have actually come back and voluntarily reported to us that they've experienced an increase in their monthly or even daily wages. Sometimes it's just a daily income supplement that they just need to get them by or to put food on the table or something like that. And so the success rate has been really encouraging. And we've gone a step further. We've actually worked across agencies with our social security organizations as well as our pension funds to provide social security schemes for such gig workers, because they are not full-time employed. So therefore, social safety nets become extremely important. And so cross-agency collaboration becomes really important to support these communities. Next slide, please. And we've also done impact studies, and we found that for these communities, it has helped them to reduce debts, improve their savings rates. It has also helped them to improve their well-being. And more importantly, more than 70% have actually said it gives those disadvantaged groups greater opportunities to be part of the economy. It's never perfect, like what some of us said earlier, there are always issues. And so some of the improvements are, as what we heard the earlier speakers speak about, is to look at improving access to devices, to also look at how can we encourage greater self-learning among such communities, because it's not a natural thing for such communities to do. And last but not least is how can we strengthen portable social protection to digital platform workers. So these are areas that we will continue to work on in the coming years. And I think next slide is my last one, my thank you slide. It's been a privilege to share our experience, the little that we have achieved. And we'd be happy to continue the conversation and to look at how we can foster greater collaboration and sharing amongst the countries and representatives that are on the call. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nair, for sharing Malaysia's initiatives in building digital platforms to promote job creation and economic participation of vulnerable groups, particularly through public-private partnerships, as well as the roles of the government in facilitating trust and fostering open policy. I also think the approaches you mentioned from promoting digital inclusion are very important for ensuring that everyone has access to digital technologies and digital capacity to harness its potential. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. Next, it is my great pleasure to invite Ms. Junie Kim, Director for the Innovation Planning Division of the Ministry of the Interior and Safety of the Republic of Korea. Ms. Kim, based on the experiences of the Republic of Korea, what do you think are the major crucial factors for fostering innovation for inclusion of vulnerable groups, particularly by promoting inclusive policy processes and public service delivery for building an inclusive state? Ms. Kim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Miguel. I will talk about key elements and basic principles for fostering innovation for inclusion of vulnerable groups based on Korean government experiences. First of all, the government should make it clear that its policy priority is the inclusion of vulnerable groups. This is very important because the policy priority becomes the vision and goal when creating an overarching innovative action plan. Hence, the government must initiate and lead in fostering innovative policies to include vulnerable groups. All levels of the government must adhere to an overarching action plan, and by all levels of government, I mean ministries, administrations, agencies, and local government altogether. And each organization creates a customized action plan following the direction and strategies from the primary action plan, like a Korean New Deal, as Ambassador mentioned. However, a ministry is needed to take responsibility and authority to facilitate all other levels of government action plan. Furthermore, the ministry evaluates the implementation, progress, and performance of every action plan. In Korea, Ministry of the Safety and Safety take the responsibility and authority. Let me give you more details. Once an inclusion policy is initiated, a ministry should submit a law revision to the parliament, and an administration should execute the law as an official ordinance. Public agencies and local government are required to deliver the service to the vulnerable groups. Therefore, each and every part of the government plays a crucial role in not only fostering, but also implementing innovative for the inclusion of vulnerable groups. Next slide, please. I will be giving examples of promoting inclusion policy processes. First, every citizen has the freedom to propose his or her suggestions through both online and offline communication channels to partake in policymaking. The government must review and respond to every suggestion with the help of big data services and analysis. Second, the government challenges citizens to propose solutions to everyday social problems like how to revitalize old Korean traditional market that have been suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic. The government provides rewards for an excellent and creative idea and purchases the idea as a commercial product through public procurement process. Lastly, local communities have their own platforms to discuss their daily lives and how to improve such. Local groups are connected by digital platforms and regular in-person meetings. All of these channels between citizens and the government empower vulnerable groups to engage in policy process. Next slide, please. Finally, I will explain what kind of services are delivered to vulnerable groups. Multiple agencies collaborated and revised a comprehensive plan to provide beneficiary for seniors, disabled, and low-income households. The beneficiary plan is easily accessible by an online application or a visit to a local community center. We also call it one-stop service or full package service provision. With the age of digital technology, many of the public and private services are online, and it created another vulnerable group, digital illiteracy group. As a result, the government provided learning centers and installed very simple kiosks in public places. For those who are unable to seek help in any way, the government officials regularly visit the household and provide proactive services. When they detect symptoms of poverty trap, as delayed payment of public utility charges. And this concludes my presentation, and let me finish my part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kim, for sharing Republic of Korea's approaches to fostering innovation for social inclusion. I fully concur with you that we should set policy priority as a first step, followed by establishing and implementing innovation plans at all levels of government. Also, as you explained, government should better leverage digital technologies, including big data analysis, for better meeting the special needs of vulnerable groups through providing customized services in a proactive way. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next, I would like to invite our next panelist, Mr. Mohammad Nasiri, Regional Director of UN Women Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. Mr. Nasiri, how do you think government and other stakeholders in the society can work together to develop and implement gender-responsive COVID-19 response and recovery policies? How do you think digital technologies can also contribute to addressing the gendered impact of COVID-19 on women? Mr. Nasiri, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much. I'm very grateful for your invite to participate in today's important and timely discussion. I'm equally humbled to come after the country's presentations. They are the ones who are at the front lines trying to look into the COVID issue and make everyone participate for a better future. The question on gender-responsive COVID response and recovery and the use of digital technologies raises many important issues. With the largest number of internet users globally, digital technologies in Asia-Pacific bring vast opportunities to advance inclusive and participatory processes, including as it relates to recovery from COVID. For women and girls across the region, COVID-19 has not only brought immense health challenges, but it also has exacerbated gender discrimination and social inequalities that existed before the pandemic. Due to these inequalities, COVID has impacted women and girls disproportionately, affecting women's resilience in mitigating the effects of the outbreak. Nearly all indicators relating to gender equality has worsened under COVID. Violence against women and girls has increased, with lockdowns and quarantines confining millions of women and their abusers and reducing options for support. Hotlines for victims of domestic violence in some countries reported a 57% increase in calls during the first months of COVID. Women have faced increased economic insecurity and hardship. Industries where women are overrepresented continue to be the hardest hit by COVID, with mass redundancies in the retail, hospitality, textile, and tourism industries. Women in informal employment, including domestic workers and daily wage workers, have suddenly found themselves without employment and no access to social protections. Women migrant workers face multiple vulnerabilities and discrimination as xenophobia connected to COVID increases. Women have also shouldered the increased burden of unpaid care domestic work, as care during COVID falls onto women who usually bear responsibility for looking after ill family members, children, and the elderly. Looking at women participation in COVID relief and recovery has equally highlighted a concerning picture. Women are overrepresented as healthcare workers and continue to be on the front line of COVID, yet the majority of health leadership positions and decision-making roles are held by men. COVID task force teams responsible for relief and recovery are male-dominated. According to a study by CARE International, 74% of the countries with COVID task force teams had less than 1/3 of women, with only one team having gender parity. If we move to the second slide, when we look to digital technologies, we see the potential for great impacts in advancing gender recovery from COVID, but only if we address the existing digital gender gap and cyber discrimination. 300 million fewer women than men in low and middle income countries have access to mobile internet, with South Asia holding the world's widest digital gender gap. In many countries, there are persistent social norms and economic inequalities that prevent women from independently owning a mobile phone or accessing the internet. It is not uncommon for women to access the internet through a family device, raising issues of privacy and digital footprint. Limited access to and literacy of technology has resulted in women facing difficulties in registering for financial support during COVID. Vulnerable groups have reported having to pay someone to enroll them online in COVID support schemes. Women at every level, from politicians to human rights defenders to ordinary users, face online harassment and threats. Research undertaken by UN Women shows that since the introduction of COVID, lockdowns and quarantines, online misogynistic hate speech has grown. In 2020, there was a staggering 100% increase week on week at the height of lockdowns in tweets containing misogynistic language and references. As with most security infrastructure, there is a significant gender gap in cybersecurity. In Asia and the Pacific, women account for less than 10% of the cybersecurity workforce. In addition, 74% of artificial intelligence professionals are men, making algorithm creation overwhelmingly informed by the male experience. A new project supported by the Republic of Korea on Women, Peace and Cybersecurity by UN Women Regional Office will unpack and address some of these shortcomings, empowering women to advance gender-inclusive cybersecurity and a digital world where their rights are promoted and protected. If we move to the third slide, please. Let me move and dive directly into the recommendations for way into which we can implement gender-responsive COVID response and recovery. The participation and representation of women in decision-making at all levels is critical to strengthening responsive, inclusive, and participatory governance and related processes. We must institutionalize women's equal participation in crisis preparedness now in order to ensure gender-inclusive policy and responses to future health and other crises. We must work with diverse women civil society organizations, movements, and human rights defenders to recognize the unique experience and contribution they bring to responding to COVID. With the largest number of internet users globally, frontier technologies in Asia Pacific bring vast opportunities to leapfrog traditional governance processes. However, we must ensure digital inclusion for all and that women have safe and affordable access to the internet. Only by increasing women's participation in leadership and decision-making roles and closing the gender data gap, we can only fully realize the potential for digital technologies to advance gender equality and ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nassiri, for your very insightful presentation, highlighting the importance of gender-responsive COVID-19 response, particularly by institutionalizing women's participation and collaborating with the civil society organizations in crisis preparedness and response. Thank you very much also for highlighting the important issue of digital gender gap. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, all panelists, once again, for your insightful responses. Now, I would like to invite our discussant, Ms. Isabel Deganis, Social Affairs Officer at the Division for Inclusive Social Development of UNDESA. Ms. Deganis, based on the innovative strategies, approaches, and country experiences that are shared today during the panel discussion, what do you think are the major policy recommendations for governments and other relevant stakeholders to promote innovation for social inclusion of vulnerable groups at the local, national, regional, and global levels? Ms. Deganis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Park, and good morning from New York, everyone, to our distinguished panelists and audience. Indeed, as you say, the key question that panelists have all tried to answer today is how can governments and other relevant stakeholders promote innovation in public governance and leverage digital technologies for social inclusion of vulnerable groups? I'd like to highlight 5 key recommendations made by panelists today. Firstly, governments should demonstrate leadership. Dr. Louis Meuleman stressed that innovation in public governance should be a strategic policy area. The most common public governance type is still hierarchical, and the 11 principles of effective governance for sustainable development should be a blueprint to ensure more inclusive forms of governance. Ms. Junie Kim also underlined the importance of leadership and suggested tools such as a declaration of policy priority for the inclusion of vulnerable groups. Secondly, it is necessary to strengthen government officials' capacities, skills, and mindsets at all levels for inclusive and participatory governance. Dr. Louis Meuleman underlined how silos prevent the inclusion of vulnerable groups. Rather than removing them, he called for making them work together and be more flexible. Ms. Adriana Alberti and Ms. Mi Kyung Park presented the curriculum on governance for the SDGs and specifically focused on the online training toolkit on government innovation for the social inclusion of vulnerable groups. Thirdly, there is a need to strengthen institutional mechanisms for cooperation. His Excellency, Mr. Sam Heng Boros, underlined the importance of interministerial cooperation, where 3 ministries were involved in the design and implementation of the Cambodian social protection framework. Similarly, Dr. Sumitra Nair highlighted that cross-agency cooperation and public-private partnerships are important in ensuring that benefits of the digital economy are equally distributed and that no one is left behind. Finally, as highlighted by Ms. Junie Kim, cooperation also means engaging with vulnerable groups in policy design, implementation, and monitoring, including by using online and offline platforms. Mr. Mohammed Nassiri called for women's participation in crisis preparedness and response, given the disproportionate impact of the COVID-19 crisis on women and girls. Fourthly, governments should invest in digital technologies to enhance social protection delivery and the delivery of basic public services to support the most vulnerable. Globally, during the COVID-19 crisis, governments have used digital means to extend social protection coverage and more efficiently disperse financial support. His Excellency, Mr. Sam Heng Boros, provided a very good example of the digital ID poor identification program, which has allowed Cambodia to provide support to the poor and vulnerable during the COVID-19 crisis. During lockdown and confinement measures put in place to curb the spread of COVID-19, there's been an accelerated digitalization of delivery of essential public services. Globally, 90% of ministries of education have enacted some form of policy to provide digital and broadcast remote learning. We've also seen in many countries that the crisis is driving the adoption of e-health. Fifth and finally, it is crucial that governments prioritize closing the digital divide so that vulnerable groups may benefit from essential public services and social protection measures delivered digitally, and also are empowered to engage in policy design, implementation, and monitoring. Leaving no one behind means leaving no one offline. Yet today, half of the world population, an estimated 3.7 billion people, do not use the internet. 4/5 of this offline population is located in Africa and Asia Pacific. already disadvantaged and marginalized groups are overrepresented in this offline population, which is disproportionately female, rural, poor, older, and or with limited education and low literacy. As highlighted by Mr. Mohammed Nasiri, the gender digital divide is hindering women and girls' empowerment. Governments need to take urgent action to close this digital divide in order to ensure that everyone can benefit from advances in digital public service delivery and social protection. UNDESA is launching today a policy brief entitled Leveraging Digital Technologies for Social Inclusion, which highlights the need to develop a common framework for closing the digital divide based on 4 key dimensions: access to infrastructure, affordability, digital skills, and raising awareness, especially among vulnerable and disadvantaged groups, of the benefits of the internet and providing relevant content in their local language. Thank you again for this discussion and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Isabel, for the recap of the key points of the presentations by the panelists and sharing insightful policy implications and recommendations. I firmly believe that the initiatives and efforts need to be made by government at all levels, as well as the whole society, to effectively promote social inclusion of vulnerable groups and address diverse policy issues and concerns. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the Q&A session. I think we'll have time for 2 or 3 questions. We have received some questions from both from the pre-registered participants as well as from the Zoom Q&A box during the meeting. So among those questions, I would like to ask the first question to Dr. Nail of MDAC. This is the question that we've received from one of the distinguished participants, Mr. Tim Unwin, through the Zoom box. He mentioned, I wonder if Dr. Nair might be able to share any information about how Malaysia is using digital technologies to support and include migrant labor. Could you kindly respond to this question, please, Dr. Nair?
Thank you, Ms. Park and Mr. Unwin. So let me just clarify that the programs that I spoke about earlier, eRezeki and GLOW, specifically the training that we do, our mandate is to train bottom 40 communities, which are largely Malaysian. Now, that said, migrant workers is not under our purview. So we report to the Ministry of Communications. Migrant workers are under the purview of Ministry of Human Resources. And yes, we do provide them with some advice and guidance, but the details of the programs, I'm not clear or at liberty to share them tonight. I don't have the details with me. At the same time, the sharing economy platforms that I shared earlier, the ones that I showed on the slide earlier, I showed that there were about 106, I think, that were local, and then 30 are international. And so our role actually is to assess and validate these platforms to ensure that they provide fair and safe working conditions for all. Yeah, and several of these platforms are open to all communities, regardless of whether they are Malaysian or migrant or international. They're open to all, provided they meet the eligibility criteria of these platforms. So they can be based in Malaysia and still tap onto these platforms, and these platforms are also present, yeah, in Malaysia. So I hope that clarifies the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Knight, for sharing Malaysia's initiative. Thank you very much. Next question, may I direct next question? May I invite His Excellency Mr. Sam Hung Burrows to answer the second question that we have received from one of our participants through the Q&A box, which is asking about how the Cambodian government induces the involvement of target population after the outbreak of COVID-19.
Thank you. Yes, like I mentioned within my presentation, we have the database of about 2.2 million, about 10% of our population that actually in the lowest quantile group. And this the data that we have, they include is a proxy mean test database. It includes the lowest poor 1, poor 2, lowest group under poverty line, and at the same time they also include disabled, elderly, children, women victim of HIV. So within this data, we were able to kind of put it and start to interface it with mobile banking. So by doing this, we start to register this account into our system and start to actually just dish out money within all the family. And this mobile banking is very easy access for them also. We are actually very close to their houses and stuff. So they can actually just go into a commune and actually cash out the cash. But the tricky part was enroll more, because we're actually allowing people to actually register for more. So from there, we start the program for cash support for these families in June. Now, 6 months later, we're able to include about almost 300,000 more family, where it goes growth about 50% growth of family that we can include into our program. From there is also is making sure that we have to train a lot of staff from top to bottom constantly, allow them to be able to go to houses. Actually, people have a family that request, they said they need to support. Then they have to be questioned, they have to be interviewed, questioned, and go through the system and actually integrate their database right from their houses or from you up to the top. So this is able to actually receive the same cash amount, where if they actually identify a poor 1 or poor 2, or doesn't disable or certain vulnerable group, they will receive the amount that actually have been determined already. So this is how we use that to respond within COVID-19.
Okay, thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Barros, to share Cambodia's very comprehensively and in detail shared Cambodia's experience of solving a targeted population. Thank you. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Jeannie Kim from the Republic of Korea to answer one of the questions that we have received from our pre-registered participants from the Philippines. Ms. Jeannie Kim, how do you think bureaucracies may transform itself to be more responsive and agile through digital technologies? You have the floor, Ms. Jeannie Kim.
Thank you. Thank you for question. I think bureaucracy is a very traditional and rigid structure, but these days, thanks to digital technology, government structure and working system are transforming to be more flexible. Inside government, policy-making process, decision-making process, reporting, and communications are faster, more interactive between public servants. And outside government, for the people, public service delivery is comprehensive and collaborated and provided online and mobile. By online and mobile platform for citizens' convenience. Also, public officials, public servants need to learn digital skills for their everyday work, and they should learn data and how to use data analysis and understand how to adapt it to the public policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Jeannie Kim, for sharing that answer with us. I think we have time for one more question. If I may invite Mr. Mohammad Nasiri from UN Women Regional Office. This is also another question that we've received from one of our pre-registered participants from Kenya. Mr. Nasiri, how do you think the public and private sector could work together to support the innovation with the high prospects for women?
Thank you very much, and it's a very pertinent question, and I believe it would be very naive of us to assume that any entity post-COVID can do it on its own. That's why I believe the private-public partnerships are essential. Concrete examples here that we're working with 26 governments and the Charles Eden Foundation in China to introduce mobile banking and digital wallets for women of different socioeconomic backgrounds. And in parallel, we're also working with these groups of women to provide them with digital and financial literacy. The partnership would not have been realized without the green light of the governments, but also it would not have been realized if it wasn't for WeChat and Charles Edan to come in and support us there. So it is only one out of a few examples that we have. Another one is a partnership with Yahoo, also to provide opportunities for digital remote learning for girls in different locations where UN Women is working. Again, this would not have happened without the approval of the relevant ministries of education in these countries, but also with the support of Yahoo. So those are two concrete examples that I'm putting forward. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nasiri, for sharing the examples from the region. Thank you very much. I think this is now the time for us to wrap up the Q&A discussion. I would like to thank all participants who have shared their questions. And for many questions which we could not address here today due to time constraint, please kindly note that we have created an online discussion board at UNPOG's website to facilitate continued discussion and partnership building. And we would like to cordially invite our distinguished speakers to further contribute to other questions that our participants may have. So I would like to once again sincerely appreciate our distinguished speakers for their very insightful contributions today. Now, I would like to give the floor back to Mr. Pokun Shim for the summary and closing. Back to you, Mr. Shim.
Yes, thank you, Lee Kyung. I hope you have all enjoyed the insightful and valuable discussions. And I would like to thank you all for your dedication and participation in this side event. In view of insightful interventions by our speakers, I would like to highlight a few key points. First of all, we need to have an angle centered on people. Just a moment, I turn on this video. Okay. We need to remove poverty, inequality, and weak rule of law. We need to emphasize with the socially vulnerable who have been hit hard by COVID-19. Let's not only emphasize efficiency in our health, but also think of such elements of equity, inclusiveness, and the consideration with our hearts. Second, let's take actions. So let's review and change course of unfair and irrational laws, regulations, policies, which we have taken for granted because of habitual routine. Third, there is a proverb that if we want to go fast, go alone. If we want to go far, go together. Together, let's pool our strengths to achieve sustainable goals by 2030. We'll continue to support the developing member states in their government innovation efforts for social inclusion of vulnerable groups. Before closing, I'd like to make a few announcements. We prepared an online discussion board, as Mi-kyung said before, on UNPOG website to continue today's interactions. This could be a platform to exchange ideas and experiences and drive changes. We also will invite you to participate in the post-side event evaluation survey for your invaluable feedback and to better identify your capacity demands. All the pertinent information, including presentation materials, will become available on UNPOG web page, and we will inform you accordingly. I'd like to thank the participative audiences and the distinguished speakers. DPIDG, UNDESA will remain fully committed to engaging with you. Thank you for your attention.